smell it. The suffocating smell of death that came with any mass grave, clinging to the air for miles around the village, hanging over it like some grim reminder of the dark fate coming for us all. They flock to it like flies to shit. It's been 8 months since the Crimson Blight struck. None of us know how it started or hell, where it even came from. Only the beasts suffer its consequences too. One night, without any prior incidents or warnings, a herd of blighted Pancreasauruses stormed the town with the furor of demons, horribly swollen and racked with agony, their beady amber eyes now a bloody shade of red. They were no longer the docile cattle from the neighboring village that I'd been used to playfully teasing at the farmer's market. Their heads looked impossibly disfigured, throbbing red masses of flesh with protruding bony growths like morning stars that had dragged their heads near the ground. They screamed and shrieked constantly in their frenzy, slamming their skulls with all the force they could muster into anything that they could reach. The sweet herbivores had developed an insatiable desire for flesh, battering and devouring the people and livestock of the village as if their lives depended on it. They tore every fiber of tissue that they could from the corpses, fighting amongst themselves for whatever they could get, even eating the other beasts that had been shot down or killed by blunt trauma as they used their own skulls like improvised flails. Their bellies swelled to impossible sizes as they gorged themselves, bulging masses that looked like they were a few painful breaths away from bursting. The beasts were slain by sunrise, but not before they had completely devastated the village. 120 people dead, with about just as many injured. The village grieved, but still remained strong in their resolve, no stranger to calamity. Rebuilding and burials began the very next day. Even as we grappled with the immense physical and emotional exhaustion of the night before, we convinced ourselves that the worst of it had passed, that our new walls and watchtowers would keep another tragedy like this from ensuing. What we had failed to realize was that the threat never left the village, that it had crept its way into our homes and set its roots in our beds. Survivors showed signs of blight within days, with deadly fevers and grotesque rashes that covered the body like bloodstains. As the rashes worsened and became increasingly irritated, victims would often scratch incessantly at their skins until it tore off in great patches, leaving them bleeding and vulnerable to infection. They became increasingly more agitated, aggressive, and paranoid as symptoms worsened, often refusing treatment and becoming irrationally belligerent. These effects were worsened by extreme insomnia, which forced bouts of psychosis and hallucinations in the infected. Dense growths of bone and muscle tissues would rapidly develop throughout the body, causing excruciating pain and discomfort. Bones would oftentimes break as muscle overdeveloped throughout the body. Children and young teenagers succumbed particularly quickly to the disease, as the blight seemed to immensely target and swell the muscles in front of their throats, causing suffocation. I think the true horror of the affliction was made clear just 6 days after the Crimson Night. Captain Hayes was found chewing through the jugular of his 9-year-old daughter. The single father and veteran, beloved and taken care of by the villagers who sympathized with his struggles, had succumbed to insanity and killed his daughter in a shocking display of brutality after becoming convinced that she was an undercover Titanian soldier. The following day, other survivors had followed suit, attacking and feasting on anyone in sight with such ferocity that they often grievously injured themselves pursuing them. Husbands tore their arms to shreds, smashing through the doors to attack their wives. Fathers shattered their teeth on the skulls of their children. We were convinced that Satan had come for us all, to punish us for some grievous sin that we had unknowingly committed. The Blighted were put down as quickly as possible and burned at the outskirts of town. But by nightfall, the stench of charred flesh had attracted Blighted beasts. Only this time, their numbers had nearly tripled. There were all kinds of blighted creatures in the attacking horde, all killing and eating each other as they stormed the village. We were fortunate enough that the walls held, but not without any casualties. This time, the guards opted to terminate any injured survivors to minimize the risks of blight spreading. They were burned without any opportunity for the families to come and grieve their loved ones. Despite these desperate measures, cases of blight continued to appear within the walls, as if the disease haunted the very air of the village. Surrounding villages isolated and became defensive of their territories, unwilling to cooperate in fear of spreading the disease further. Perhaps, most mysteriously of all, no one could get into contact with the SEAF, or anyone off-planet for that matter. There was complete radio silence from the outside world, not a single broadcast from either the SEAF or the Astro Navy. We have watched desperately the skies continuously every night, but not a single ship or carrier has come through the atmosphere, where about at least 10 a week would come by to buy our produce or sell supplies. As we cower behind the walls, besieged by blight, our crops die, and what little sources of drinking water are available become contaminated with blight. It seems that even boiling the water is not enough to decontaminate it. Whether corpses burn or not, the blighted have begun to show up every night. The village is almost entirely desolate at this point, with about 1/10 of us remaining. Hope seems pointless now, as death becomes increasingly preferable to living under the constant terror and grief that we endure. We want to return to our families, in some afterlife at least, to leave this place behind forever. Its very core has become tainted with death and suffering, hollowed by the blight that's haunted our every thought. All that remains is sorrow and anguish, fear and despair, clinging to the air like smoke. And it's made them more ravenous with each passing night. Call me crazy, but it almost feels like they can smell it. Account of Obishaw number 44, Blight of Bruce Gardner, Village Chieftain. File associated with case number 36637. Experiment Red Sun.